Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Shred's Takes. I'm Mike Shredder. I'm joined by, feels like I get joined by so many people from my Columbia Sports Management program. I'm joined by Tommy Smith, Davidson grad, IM basketball teammate, and member of the spring cohort of 24 this year. So he's going to be graduating in 25 of May. Tommy, thank you so much for coming on the pod. I'm glad we were able to put this
Yeah.
together.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Absolutely. So for those who are listening in, Tommy and I are going to be talking about we're going to be talking a little bit about just kind of a lot of different things, but we're going to start out with the NBA Finals preview. But we're going to kind of talk about the Celtics and Mavericks run. He's a huge Celtics fan. He's from the Boston area, so obviously we know who he's going to be picking and rooting for in the finals. But Tommy, let's just kind of jump into it a little bit here, which is, can you talk a little bit about just the Celtics run to begin with and what you've seen? I mean, again, they're 12-2 right now, obviously in the playoffs, but can you talk a little bit about the season as a whole and the playoff run and just kind of give your thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course. So I think the tough part about this playoff run is a lot of people, myself included, feel we really have not been tested yet. We are, the one seed, 64 wins in the season. We're one of the best teams all regular season, but come playoff time, we've kind of had a pretty soft run to the finals. The Heat without Jimmy Butler, obviously went through that pretty easily. Cavs ended up having no Jared Allen. Donovan Mitchell was banged up late in the series, and then Halliburton got hurt for the Pacers, who were already missing Benedict Mathurin. So I think a lot of people are wondering like if we're truly tested yet. But I think the great thing is, like you said, we were 12-2, and we have not played even close to our best basketball yet. I mean, we are Tatum is shooting, I think, like 25, 27% from three. And that is just simply not sustainable for one of the top, 5, 10 players in the NBA. I'm someone who really believes he's going to turn that around this series. And even still, with shooting such a low percentage from three, he's been playing good basketball. I mean, he's leading our team in points, rebounds, and assists. Like, this is a guy who we can count on, night in, night out. And Jaylen Brown playing great basketball as well. He really stepped up and picked up some of the slack last series. One thing I am a little bit worried about is obviously Luka and Kyrie are the best backcourt in the NBA right now. I do think if anyone can guard them, it's us with our backcourt of Drew Holiday and Derek White. Um, Drew Holiday is probably the most clutch defender in a recent while for the NBA. He's made like game-saving play after game-saving play, so I think he's been a great pickup. Obviously, for me, it was pretty heartbreaking to see Marcus Smart go this offseason. He was my favorite player, still is one of my favorite players in the NBA, one of my favorite players of all time. Just kind of that like hustle and grit, like really embodied Boston. Um, and I'll always love him for that. But like the fact that we were able to basically swap him and Rob Williams out for Kristaps and Drew Holiday while picking up some picks was definitely a worthwhile trade. Got to tip the cap to Brad Stevens. He had to make the hard choice, and he'd made it, and we're better for it. Um, but it's tough to see like two great Celtics like Rob and Marcus go. But obviously this season has been amazing. And that kind of leads into the point about Kristaps' health is the main concern I have going into the finals. If he's not able to stay healthy, we're in serious trouble trying to guard Lively and Gafford down there. As much as I love Horford, he's not the center he once was. And I think it's something where we need him to be healthy, and that's why it's great that we got the sweep, got a few weeks. Well, we would have had the few weeks off anyways. But it's good that we were able to get the sweep and get this time off, even though they're in the same boat going up 4-1. So I'm hopeful that, Kristaps can come back fully healthy. I'm hopeful we don't have to ramp him up too much. Obviously, it takes a little while to get back into the swing of things when you're out for a few weeks. But I'm hopeful by the end of game one, hopefully he'll have knocked off the rust. Maybe we'll still pull out game one at home. Who knows? But I think the first few games of the series are going to really dictate how it goes because, like I said, Kristaps coming back. We need Tatum and Brown to come in confident, and we need to slow down Luka and Kyrie.
Yeah, so my question along with that then, before we kind of get into other stuff within this finals, is with the Celtics, the question with them has always been, they had a good bench during the regular season. The
Hmm.
consistency of those guys off the bench now. Now, again, you're thinking with Porzingis coming back, Horford slides to the bench with Hauser and Pritchard. Is there a concern at all with their bench just based on, I mean, I know they've played pretty well in the playoffs, but you know, they aren't like, in my opinion, the most, creating the own shot type guys. Now, Pritchard's obviously does a good job, but Horford
Right.
and, Hauser are more guys who finish off by hitting threes or layups and stuff like that. So Hauser's mostly threes. But can you talk a little bit about just, is there a concern at all going into series with the depth and maybe their ability to produce, because the Mavericks have shown that their role players have actually been able to produce outside of Luka and Kyrie. I was just wondering if there's any concern from your end on that. Maybe there isn't.
Yeah, no, definitely a concern. I think part of what eases the concern for me is I don't feel like the Mavericks are a particularly deep team either. They have a great like starting lineup in terms of their role players, but outside of their starting five, I guess, and their backup center, whoever's not playing between Gafford and Lively, like I'm not really too concerned about it. But for the Celtics, yeah, there's a little concern. Sam Hauser has been really, really bad since round one of the playoffs. I think I saw a stat he was like one for like his last 20 at one point. Um, and there's this whole like wave taking over like sports in general, basketball in particular now these days, where it's like you'd much rather have a guy in your team like a Duncan Robinson or a Sam Hauser who's like really good at one thing and not so good at others versus just kind of good across the board. And so when Sam Hauser is really good at that one thing, which is shooting threes, and he's not shooting threes well, it's not going to bode well for us. So I am concerned with his play. I'm a fan. He's, normally a great shooter. He's been playing harder defense this year than usual, which is why he's getting more minutes. Um, but I am a little concerned if he can't start finding a shot because we do need him to come in and hit open threes, which he has not been able to do. Horford back to the bench is huge because it just opens up a lot of opportunities uh, with him being able to just knock down corner threes. As long as we're staggering Tatum and Brown's minutes in terms of shot creation, I think we'll be fine. Obviously Mazzula is the head coach for a reason, but one thing I kind of like am a little concerned about is a lot of times you'll see Pritchard, Hauser, and even Cornette like playing together, like for their stretches, which is something I think is pretty interesting. I get that you want to kind of stack your minutes um, with your superstars, but I think maybe generally the consensus among leagues is you kind of want to filter in your bench guys and not play them all together. But I guess the Nuggets do a similar thing, right, where they employ kind of five outs with their bench units. So, and they're the reigning champs. So I guess maybe they know something I don't. But at the same time, it does concern me a little bit when I see like Pritchard, Hauser, Cornette, like all on the court together. Those minutes are typically minutes which I'm not super confident we're going to win. But, I think Pritchard's great. He's a guy who can, create his own shot, knock down the open three. He's an offensive rebounding machine, which he just should not be at his height. Like he just gets a ton of offensive rebounds, gets all the hustle plays, which I love to see. Um, so if you're asking me if I'm like concerned, I am a little bit, but I'd be more concerned if it was a team that was a little more deep than the Mavericks. I think Pritchard's going to give us good minutes. He's going to hustle. I hope Hauser's going to start knocking down his shots. That's a big one. Cornette's a good defender inside and a good rebounder. And obviously now Horford shifting back to the bench with Porzingis. Those are the guys you got to keep an eye out for. And O'Shea Brissett had a great series last series as well. I don't expect him to get much playing time, but he made some really key plays for us with Kristaps out. Maybe Xavier Tillman gets a few minutes as well. He's solid. So I think like there is some concern, especially at the top end of that bench, but we'll see how it plays out given the fact that the Mavs are not the most deep team either.
So you and I talked about this last night, and the idea that Mazzula plays the analytics, right? Celtics shoot
Yep.
the most threes in the league, the best 3-point shooting team. Which there's the concern, obviously, from my end, being a guy that's not a diehard Boston fan, that could bode to be potentially a problem if they're not hitting threes. The two games they have lost in the playoffs, they shot abysmal from three, right? And
Mhm.
they unfortunately they do keep shooting them. Where I think that Tatum and Brown are so good that they're at their best when they're getting downhill and attacking the basket because they're so big and strong. It's really
Mhm.
hard to contain those two. Is that at all a concern? Just with Mazzula, I think is, as we talked about last night, is a good, I think, getting that initial game plan, following the analytics. I think that there's sometimes a struggle with in-game management and late game execution.
Yep.
But the one thing that I obviously want to hear from you, because you're a guy that loves to shoot threes when we played, is do you
Yep.
think that that's a potential issue? Because I know the Mavericks and the Celtics both shoot a lot of threes, but do you think that the Celtics need to be able to rely on a balance offensively? I know they try to do that, but it's you can't really do that when you're playing against a porous defensive team like Indiana. Like the Mavs are a good
Right.
defense. Do you think that's a concern that they're playing too much in the analytics and sometimes losing that balance, or do you not think that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of it's matchup based, to be honest, and I think that takes analytics into account, right? So I think part of what's made it tough this playoffs, and we'll see if Missoula is can adapt, is so far our three matchups we've played against three like elite defensive centers, I'd say. We played against Bam Adebayo, obviously round one, elite defensive center roaming the paint. Miles Turner, I'd also say is an elite defensive center, even though Indiana as a team is not like had not overall been the best defensive team. They were a lot better in the playoffs, and I think Miles Turner is a great defensive center as well. I think he led the league in blocks a few years ago. And then you're on, and then sorry, in between that, it was Jared Allen. Well, Jared Allen didn't play, but Evan Mobley is a guy who's getting Defensive Player of the Year votes. I think that's something where your best bet is probably attacking those teams from the 3-point line because that is a strength of ours. And now we're going up against a Mavs team who is really not that good at defense. And I think that's where we're going to just kind of figure out if Mazzula can adapt. Yes, like Gafford and Lively are like solid enough defenders. I'm not too concerned with either of them. I think this series is going to be a lot about like Tatum being able to blow by whoever's guarding him and then making the right decision, whether that's, hitting a layup or just kicking it out to the open three, because I think their perimeter defenders, quite frankly, aren't great either. PJ Washington's like solid. But if we can get switches onto Luka and Kyrie and make them guard us out of the perimeter, I think we're going to get whatever we want attacking downhill. That's going to force whoever to come in and collapse from the corner, and that's going to get us open threes. So I'm not too concerned about taking too many threes. And that analytically, it gives us the edge. That's what Joe's all about, is getting that analytical edge. And there's no guarantees in sports. Like the only thing you can do is take like every stat that you possibly can and every piece of knowledge generally that you can and put it onto the court. And, Joe does that. And it might not always work, but I think the majority of the time it does. And I think he's someone who I didn't love at first as a coach, but he's really grown on me. Um, a lot of my friends who are Celtics fans like hate his 2-for-1 policy, which basically like we just like chuck a three up with like we basically a lot of the times we'll get like two like mid to bad shots instead of like waiting it out and getting one good look. And I think the thing people sometimes fail to realize is like there's no guarantee we get a good look, even if we take all the shot clock all the way down. Um, we get two like semi decent to bad looks or like one like okay look. And a lot of the times we'll hit one of those like bad, like these are NBA players. Like you'll have like Derek White hitting a ridiculous pull up contested three with 32 seconds on the shot clock, and nobody talks about it. There's like, oh, great shot. But then if he misses it, it's like he gets a lot of crap. So I think the 2-for-1 mentality is something which Joe really implements as well. And that's the use of analytics. And I think it works. Obviously, it's not 100%, but um, the analytics always looks worse when it doesn't work when doing like the normal conventional thing, because it's like you're trying out these new things, you're you know making a new change to the game that people have known for decades. So I think it's easy to recognize the faults in it, but I think generally it works out well.
The only thing I would challenge you on is the Mavericks have had the best defense in the NBA since the deadline. So like
Yeah.
that, and I get like personnel wise, you would look at it from a Celtic standpoint and say, hey, it's a favorable matchup. But the one thing I will say is Luka and Kyrie, especially Kyrie, it's probably
Hmm.
been his best playoffs defensively I've ever seen Kyrie play defense. And Luka, to his credit,
Yeah.
he's not a good defender, but like he gets steals, he does some stuff. But it'll be interesting because I think what's the key for me, and I love to hear this from you, is as we kind of look into the preview, is can the Celtics handle the physicality of Dallas? Because I don't think they played against. I mean, the Heat were a very physical team, to be fair, but the
Hmm.
Heat were limited, I think, in a lot of things they could do to negate what the Celtics were able to, get done. But like with
Hmm.
Porzingis coming back, Porzingis is obviously a finesse player, right? But he's very good. We're going in the playoff series. Are you concerned at all about the level of physicality that Dallas does play with? Because again, Luka and Kyrie are physical. Washington, Gafford, Derrick Jones Jr. Like these guys are physical players, and they're going to try, and obviously that's probably what their game plan is going to be on the Celtics, if I had to guess. Do you
Yeah.
are you concerned about that at all? I mean, maybe you're not. Maybe you're like, look, Tatum and Brown and can handle this, and no problem. But is that a concern at all? Or and if it's not, why do you think the Celtics can be able to handle that physicality well?
Yeah, it is a little bit of a concern. I think, that's what's knocked us out of the playoffs the last few years is the Heat are an extremely physical defensive team, and that's kind of what killed us. As well, even the Warriors back when we lost them in the finals played us really physically. And I think that's something where every year you can handle it a little better. And the Mavs are a great team. Like you said, like I guess they are one of the best defenses like since the trade deadline, but I think we are the thing that makes us so special is like 1 to 5 can score and create their own shot and do it from wherever. And I don't think there's any other team in the NBA that can say that. So if you have like one weakness on defense, and I think generally the Mavs, it sounds like they have a great system, but I think they are probably not the best individual defenders across the board. I think if anyone can exploit that, it's us. Um, I don't see. I think the fact that everyone 1 to 5 can shoot the lights out of the ball for us is something that's very hard to guard.
Yeah.
I think even with Kyrie and Luka like playing hard defense this year, I think it's no secret they're not the most quick, naturally gifted defenders. I think those are guys we can really take advantage of in switches. Like I think Kyrie, we can use our size against him if we get a good switch. Um, Luka's been better this year, but I still think he's not the quickest guy in terms of like his footwork on defense.
He's not quick.
Um,
He's not quick regardless.
yeah, exactly. So, and I don't know. I feel more confident going into this series as their defense not killing us versus like a team. I don't know. I would have been worried against the Wolves. I know maybe statistically, I guess since the trade line, statistically the Mavs have been up there, but I think the Wolves scared me a lot more than the Mavs do. Even with Kyrie and Luka's ability to take over a game, that's something that's, not a lot of other backcourts can do in the history of the NBA. I think we match up a lot better with the Mavericks. Whoever you play in the NBA Finals is going to be a tough matchup. That's just how it works. But I think our strengths align better with the weaknesses of the Mavs, so that's why I'm a little, optimistic going into it.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, it's funny. I'm the guy who's picking the Mavs to win in seven. So I like the matchup personally
Yeah.
more because I think I think they have the two best shot creators on the court. That's just my. I think
Yeah.
yes, Boston's a deeper team, but I also think like Derek White has not played as well recently, and Drew Holiday for how good he is. He had a great series against Indiana, but like he can be incredibly inconsistent on offense.
Hmm.
My big thing though with Boston though, which is interesting, is when I'm looking kind of across this playoff run is with the Mavericks as well, you know, is the strategy you think best for Boston defensively is to, because I talked to Andrew Deitzer about this the other day, and I think this is actually a pretty interesting strategy. He said, is like, look, Luka and Kyrie are gonna score combined for 70 points. Like that's just, and then but if you allow what he said, if you allow the other guys to only score 20, Celtics are gonna beat them pretty handily, right? Each game. Would you, as a Boston fan and a guy who loves watching the Celtics, would you be more, amenable to being saying, "Hey, look, if you're Joe Mazzula, like we're going to do our best job on Luka and Kyrie, but we're not gonna trap them on ball screens. We're going to play them one on one. They score 35 each, that's fine, but we're not going to let Daniel Gafford, Derek Lively, Derek Jones Jr., and PJ Washington score any points." And we feel like our depth is the reason we're going to be able to beat them and that kind of thing. Like, because that's a strategy people try to do with Jokic, is like let him score a lot
Right.
of points and eliminate the ability for others to get going. Do you think that's a strategy they should employ, or do you think that they should trap ball screens with those guys, get the ball out of their hands, and that kind of thing? I don't know what you're thinking about, because I think that's an important thing to think about as we go into the series.
Yeah, 100%. I think the tough part for me is that we we did employed the strategy you said where we just kind of like let them score against Steph a few years ago. And Steph dominated us and they won the series, obviously. We kind of, we were dropping on ball screens against Steph Curry, which is just I don't know. I don't know. Wasn't a fan of that tactic back then. Still not a fan of it now. But obviously it's a new coach since then, it's a new system. And Ime is a great coach as well. And we've lost to some players from that old team. But to your question about do I think we should get the ball out of the Stars' hands? I think we're going to have to let one of them beat us. I don't think there's a way that you can take both Luka and Kyrie out of the game. That's what makes them so dangerous. Um, I think you just got to see if one of them is not playing as well as the other and try to target the one who's playing better. Um, a lot of the times that'll probably be Luka or Kyrie at the end of the game, but I think you just got to do your best to eliminate one and hope the other doesn't kill you. It's tough because it's, like I said, like they're two of probably the top like 15, 20 players in the NBA. Luka probably in the top like five. I wouldn't put like it's tough because Kyrie in crunch time is probably also like in that top 5, 10 convo, but he's
Oh yeah.
just um they're both elite players, elite offensive players, elite, creators for the rest of their team, and you're just not going to like fully slow them down ever. But I think you got to do think you got to trap them off ball screens occasionally, at least throw different looks at them, keep them on their toes. But if Luka's hitting shots like he was in the first quarter the other night, it's going to be a long series, and we just got to make sure we get him as uncomfortable as possible. And just keep mixing up the looks. Like sometimes we should probably just play them one on one. But I think at the end of the game, especially when they slow the game down, I think we got to throw some looks at them to make someone besides Luke and Kyrie beat us.
Yeah. I have two last questions. And in this segment is one of them is just what from an offensive, sorry, not from what from a defensive standpoint would you like to see in terms of matchups on Luka? People are saying Drew Holiday, who I think actually could do a very good job, because you think about what Lou Dort did on Luka, right? Kind of that like
Right.
good center of gravity, kind of a little bit shorter in size, strong, right? But the one thing is Luka had no problem scoring against Drew Holiday in the regular season. He averaged, he's going to score 35 regardless, but it's just
Right.
obviously it's the efficiencies, right? So there's that angle because Drew Holiday's probably arguably him, Jay McDaniels, Lou Dort are probably like the top three defensive guys perimeter wise in the NBA.
Hmm.
But you also think about maybe putting like JB or Tatum on them. But the question with that is you don't want those guys in foul trouble. If you're, do you want to see a mixture of that? Because I personally would not want to see, I think he's a great defender. I would not want to see Derek White on Luke. I think Luke is just a little too big.
I
Um,
agree.
do you think that Drew Holiday should spend the most amount of time on Luka, or do you think it should be a mixture of like, hey, let's try and throw Tatum and Brown in different spots on just because of their length? But there's also the obviously, like I said, the thing with foul trouble. Like, who would you like to see the majority on Luka, and like what individual matchup would you want to put on him? And then with that, who would you want to put on Kyrie?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two avenues we could approach, and I think it's going to be kind of whichever is working the best that night. I think the tough thing is like some nights players are going better against certain defenders, and some, obviously like off nights happen in the NBA. I think to start, I would love Drew on Luka, and I would want to start D White on Kyrie, which I'm a lot less confident in. But I do think Derek White's a great defender, and in terms of length, like Derek White is like someone who could guard Kyrie, I think. So I'd love to start with that. Like you mentioned, I don't want to have Tatum and Brown getting in foul trouble, but I could very easily see us switching to having Jalen on Luka. If I think if Drew was on Kyrie, that would be a great matchup for us as well. I think that would make it really difficult for him to get off good looks. I think Drew is our biggest asset, and I think we need to have him on like whoever is just kind of taking over at that point. I think he can guard both, and that's part of what makes me confident about this series. But I think you kind of got to flip it depending on if Kyrie or Luka's having a good night. I think again, I think the biggest thing this series is going to be keeping them on their toes, not letting them get into a rhythm against a certain defender, throwing different looks at them, throwing ball screen traps at them. But to start, Drew on Luka, D White on Kyrie, see how that goes. Um, but then maybe you shift into Drew on Kyrie and Jalen on Luka, shift D White out on one of the wings. The series is mainly for me going to be about help defense because they're going to do a lot of their pick and rolls where they have Lively crash to the rim and go for an alley-oop. Um, we need to figure out a way to play good help defense and also sag back and guard those. We can't just give up the dunks every possession. I think that's going to be the big thing is how like our centers actually play, like Kristaps and Al. Um, so I'm interested to see it, but that's how I would start.
Yeah, no, I like that strategy. What's interesting too to kind of think about too is, there's the idea with Porzingis. He plays in the drop coverage, right?
Right.
Horford does too. Now we saw when the Timberwolves did that, it was an absolute disaster. Like I've said it many times in the spot. I am the biggest anti-drop coverage guy there probably is. I think it's just dumb. I get you're trying to eliminate lobs and you're trying to defend the paint, but when you're playing against guards like Steph, Luka, Kyrie, Durant, I think it's the dumbest strategy because those guys are very capable mid-range shooters, and honestly, they're really good at it.
Hmm.
If from the Celtics standpoint, do you need like you kind of talked about like throwing different coverages? Do you because you just said you're not necessarily the biggest fan of the drop coverage standpoint, but obviously Porzingis is going to play in drop coverage.
Right.
Do you think that's a strategy that they're going to probably have to adjust away from? Because I think they need to play up on screens and that type of thing, just because of how good Luka and Kyrie are creating off ball screens. And Luka's vision, Kyrie's vision, like those guys can just really make plays. I think the drop coverage is that's kind of my last question is like, do you think the drop coverage is going to be something that the Celtics are going to have to quickly pivot away from? Because I don't think it's a very good strategy if you're going against these two elite guards.
Yeah. Like you said, like going against like elite level shot creators and shot makers as well as like playmakers like these guys is not the best recipe for drop coverage. I hate to go back to the 2022 finals. That was a really tough time for to be a Celtics fan, but we were doing drop coverage on Steph and he was just absolutely torching us. And now you have two guys who can do that. We need, we'll see how it goes. That has been our strategy historically. If we can like fight over their ball screens up top, like that's one thing, but I don't think we're going to be able to guard very well if especially the way Luka and Kyrie just like slow down the game as they go around those screens. Like Luka does such a great job of like he'll go around the screen, he'll get a guy on his back, and then he either just has like a free floater or he'll be able to throw up the lob to Lively. Um, he just plays with so much control, and when you can do that, going around like these screens set by Gafford, Lively, whoever it is, like that's like scary. Like sometimes he just gets like looks at you're like, how could he be that open as the best player on the court? And it's because he did such a good job like using his body to get around the screen, and get up the layups and find the open man. And so yeah, like I am pretty scared of playing drop coverage because if there's nobody in front of Luka's face, he's going to make the right play. I think we need to get up and attack him and just kind of like make him panic. I think that's really our only chance. Um, I keep going back. I don't know why I watched so much of Game 5 because it was just not that good of a basketball game. But one of the few plays that like they actually forced Luka into a bad play was they had Gobert come up off the screen and kind of double him at the top, and Luka tried to force a pass in the Lively, and Ant stole it, got off on a breakaway. They were down like 25, so it did not matter at all. But like it was like a fun little like, oh, maybe that's how we can attack Luka. Just make him get the ball out of his hands in like an area he's not comfortable with. Push him back. A lot of hedging could work. I think it's just, we got to try as many things as we can until something works. I think that's going to be the big thing is like adaptability. Like we need to make sure we're always willing to try something new. And that's going to go a lot on Joe, where it's like, you need to realize that, this is a time when you need to adapt to the way this other team plays. And maybe what we've been doing all season long isn't going to work against the Mavericks.
Yeah. I'm gonna edit this out, but we only have like 10 minutes left on this. So
Yeah.
what I'm gonna do is we can just run through this and then I'll send you another link to do the draft.
Perfect.
And then we'll do that. But okay. So I guess my last I thought that was gonna be my last question, but you made me think of another one, which is what, because I always, Kyrie, I get why he's so difficult to guard, right? Because he's very quick off the bounce. His footwork is unbelievable. His handle's incredible. And he's probably the best under the rim finisher at like 6'2", I think the league's ever seen. I mean, the guy is just
Oh yeah.
incredible. It's just so funny whenever I watch Luka play. Like every time I sit there, I'm like, he must be the most annoying guy in the NBA to guard because, Jokic, I was making a joke, doesn't really talk trash. Like he's slow, he's methodical, but he doesn't really say anything. Like Luka lets you know about it. Like Luka will like
Yeah.
tell the fans. I mean, it's like he's gonna be talking to the fans. Like it's just gonna take one fan to set him off, like I did the other night. Um, from a standpoint of, like how annoying or I guess how frustrating is it to guard him and Kyrie when they're just making these difficult shots, especially because, Kyrie, you can understand because he's so quick and he has an incredible, I mean, he's an incredible athlete, which I think people don't realize.
Right.
Like everyone's like, oh, he doesn't dunk a lot. I'm like, no, this guy's one of the better athletes that people just don't realize. Luka's
Right.
not really that. He's really strong, but he's so
Yeah.
slow, but like just figured out a way to score 30. I still ask people, it's like, I don't, it's just really weird to watch him play, but how frustrating do you think it is just to, you think you're Jay McDaniels, you play great defense, and the guy just, just hits you with either a pull up or a three or this tough layup, and then he just lets you know about it afterwards, or let Snoop Dogg let him know afterwards.
Yeah,
Just talk about
I
that.
think it's yeah, I think it's tough because it's such like the NBA has gone to this kind of new approach to the game, which is just like a lot more like slow and methodical the way Luka plays sometimes. Like the one that stands out to me is like obviously it's a fast-paced game, but then you'll have players like driving to the hole, and the whole thing now is about the body control when you get to the layup, and slowing down the pace and letting your defender kind of blow by. And you know who killed us with that last series was Andrew Nemhard was doing that like every single possession, and it was just killing us. He'd get to the rim going full speed. He'd take that one step and slow down. Um, and or whoever was guarding him would just blow by and you get an open layup. And there's nobody that does that better than Luka. Like his body control is just absolutely ridiculous. Like he's always someone that's like can just move defenders off of him, like because he can get around people. He's never been the quickest guy, but he's someone that just knows how to like maneuver his way into the position he needs to get in. And that's something that as a defender must drive you absolutely crazy because like he's not like there's nothing about him athletically that like leaps off the page, but he is just in terms of being able to get where he needs to be to make the right play. There's nobody in the NBA that's better. Um, and that's going to be tough because to guard someone like that, you need to be like quicker than him, which he's like a deceptively quick guy. Like he's not the fastest guy, but he's quick. So you need to be quicker than him. You also need to be physical. And that's why I'm confident in a guy like Drew, who is probably one of the best guys to match up with Luka. But even still, like you mentioned, Luka has been torching him in the regular season. So we'll see if the playoffs are any different. But I think it's just tough because people like Luka just know what to do, know how to get to the positions they need to be in to be successful. And like you said, like Kyrie, he just hit some of the most ridiculous shots. Like it's tough for me with the whole Celtics Kyrie narrative. Like I liked him when he was on the Celtics. Obviously, like happy to see him succeeding and all that. Like it did not end great with the Celtics and Kyrie, but I think this would be a great chance for us to kind of get the one up there. We beat them in the playoffs a few years ago when he was on the Nets. That was really fun as a Celtics fan. I think that kind of got all of that out of our system, which was good. And now I don't think it's as much of a narrative, but if we lost to Kyrie in Boston, that would be heartbreaking for our city. So I think it's tough because he's so like he's just like such a great player in crunch time. And I think we're gonna see like I do think they're gonna win a game in Boston, and there's gonna be stuff. Or sorry, the Mavericks are gonna win a game in Boston this series at some point because we're just not a great home team. Like it doesn't matter if we're playing on home or the road, and that's a strength and a weakness. But um, I think Kyrie's gonna win a game in Boston, and the media is gonna go absolutely crazy. I don't know which game it's gonna be, but oh man, I'm not looking forward to that. But like you said, like I think two guys who just like know how to like get to spots to win and down the stretch, that's going to be tough. I think if we enter the fourth quarter, I think we need to win quarters 1 to 3. Um, because the fourth quarter is going to be tough to close out. We're not historically a great closing out team. They are. Um, but I do think overall we're the more talented team. So I think if we can win the first 3 quarters, go into quarter number 4 up by like 5-10 and just try to maintain that lead, I think that's our best chance to win this series. Um, and we'll see if that happens.
Yeah. Well, Tommy, thank you for doing this segment on the NBA Finals. And this is another episode of Shred's Takes with Tommy Smith. And, stay tuned for more.
Thanks, Mike.